All right, so good afternoon, everyone. My name is Keel County, and this is my colleague, Miss Mariell Parris. And we are from the University of Trinidad and Tobago, the Institute for Criminology and Public Safety. And we are also MPhil students at the University of the West Indies, and we are studying social policy. This afternoon, we want to present on community engagement in Trinidad and Tobago, mostly Trinidad, and our presentation will be done interchangeably. So I will now pass you on to my colleague, Ms. Parris, who will give you a bit of insight on the research context.
Okay, so we are from Trinidad and Tobago, and it's a twin island Caribbean state. We're English speaking, with a population of 1.3 million persons. We are multicultural, multi-ethnic, and a multi-religious society. And according to our statistics, crime is localized in hotspots, usually in urban areas in Trinidad. And our crime consists mostly of gun violence. Statistics point to gang activity, drug trafficking and use. And notably, we have had between 400 and 470 murders annually for the past 5 years or so. Okay, so a little background about our project. The institute with which I'm employed, we did a community engagement project in these high crime hotspot urban areas in order to develop safety plans to help communities feel safer despite the high crime levels. Okay, so I'll pass you back to Keel, who would speak on methodology.
Right. So we looked at participant selection, and what we realized was that participants were chosen based on a pre-existing relationship with the Citizen Security Program. And what we found, this led to a limitation in that the sample was not necessarily a good representation of the population. So for example, we had a situation where most of the participants were over the age of 40, which created like a age gap. So the younger people were left out, which is problematic because this means that persons who would have had a significant contribution to make to the project were unable to do so. The CSP also did not define community. So for example, we know what may be considered a community by one person may not necessarily match somebody else's definition. So for example, right now we could be a community because we're interested in crime. But these people who live within this area will be considered a community as well. And the delivery of the workshops, we were supposed to, this be community-centered workshops. And we found that the setting wasn't necessarily appropriate for them, for the participants. We are currently working on a journal article for publication, and the objective of the article is to reflect on the critical themes that we came across in our community engagement experience. So we're looking to reflect what's in our community. Right. So as I was stating before, we had problems with defining the community because they did not operationalize the term community. And as I stated before, that's problematic. We left out a whole generation of people who probably engaged in crime. We don't know because they were not part of the community. The concept of community also is very fluid. There's not one definition of community that we could use. So it is important to operationalize terms from the start of your engagement. What's the role of the community? Similarly, they did not define what the role of the community was. So this created a cloud of vagueness and ambiguity. And just to state the role, all the resources that was necessary for the engagement were found within the community. So it's very important that we clearly define what the role of community is from the start. And who does the community represent? Again, we see the problem with the age gap, people being left out, not being representative of the entire population. So I will pass it back on to Ms. Parris.
Okay. So our paper also examines what expectations we had and comparing it to the actual reality that happened on the ground. So for instance, we really wanted to make an impact in high crime areas and make an impact in violence and high crime. However, when we started the workshops, we realized that what was an issue for us as planners was not necessarily an issue for the residents in the community. So we went to speak about domestic violence, guns, gang activity, and many of the residents were interested in drainage, poor drainage, garbage disposal, teenage pregnancy, educational opportunities. And so for us, it was problematic because we did not plan to address those specific issues. What we also noticed was the suitability of the workshops. They were not quite suitable. For instance, our workshops were in a lecture format, so there was a classroom setting, we delivered lectures, but residents in the community, and especially the participants of the particular age group, were out of classrooms for so long, it didn't work. They couldn't grasp the concepts. So, for instance, we spoke on community design and environmental design for crime prevention, and many persons couldn't understand why we would speak about that to prevent violence, and that was problematic. Further, what was our biggest expectation was to link stakeholders to the community. So persons like protective services, first responders, local government. We thought it was essential to build relationships between those groups to prevent crime and increase safety. However, stakeholders like the police, local government representatives, even though invited, they did not attend the workshops. So persons were asked to identify assets who would help in crime and violence, but they never met them. So they could not possibly have put those into a safety plan. Okay, so what did we learn? At the end of our project, we learned that definitions set the tone, and we should operationalize them to have a successful engagement project. We also learned that expectations of planners do not always align with the reality in communities. In our journal article, we discuss how these and other issues affect community engagement. And as of now, we don't know the long-term effects of our project. However, we know that the safety plans we developed are helpful or would be helpful in increasing persons' safety and identifying assets. We also know that these critical issues that came up should be investigated further. Furthermore, at the end of our engagement, we came up with these plans where some of them were really robust and others were lacking. So we know that in some areas or communities, more work has to be done. This was actually the largest community engagement project that our institute has undertaken. For us, it was a great learning experience, and we hope that what we learned during our engagement would help us with future engagement in high crime areas in Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you very much. It's more like of a suggestion in terms of engaging the stakeholders. The Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force is part of the youth specialized programs, which is MILAT, CCC, and it used to be my part, which has now been removed from under national security. So I think it would be very important to liaise with the director of these programs, where at that level you will probably get more participation in terms of coming out. The head of the CCC program and MILAT is a female. She is a member of the Defense Force. I can get that information for you because I know the CCC program and the MILAT. CCC deals with the reactive and the MILAT is the proactive, right? So, and when I say that, the MILAT program has youths that already have matters before the court. So you're now coming up with something to help them. Right. The CCC program try to capture the youth before they get involved in crime and that sort of thing. So this is a very interesting study, and I think that avenue will help you a lot in terms of gathering additional information that would help to make it meaningful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think that's excellent because, hindsight is 2020, and based on reflection is how we found all these things. So I think it's good that we actually did this, and we would take your your suggestion into consideration.
Okay, no
So thank you very
problem.
much.
We'll be more than happy to help with the information.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
What kind of crime do you have in that area?
Okay, so in these particular areas, we have a high incidence of gun crime with illegal firearms, as well as drugs, drug trafficking and use, and also domestic violence are the main types of crime in these particular areas, not necessarily property.
Like kidnapping or
Uh,
abduction of girl or something like that?
Kidnapping is not as prevalent as it used to be. A few years ago, it was a major thing, but it's not as prevalent. We probably get like, what, one kidnapping a year, if so much. But a few years ago, that was the situation was way, way standard. Kidnapping of girls. There is talk of human trafficking, but we don't really have much data to substantiate the claim. But I mean, there is talk about it, and discussions are ongoing, and people are looking at it, but we don't really have much tangible evidence to talk about it publicly.
Yes, I think this is a very good presentation. My question is whether there are more of these initiatives taken by the University of Trinidad and Tobago, and if not, if you could probably explain why they have not been done.
Okay, so you're asking why they haven't been done in the past, or are you talking about in the future? Okay, well, as of now, we were hired as consultants through the Ministry of National Security from our country. So we did not initiate the engagement. We were hired as consultants to come in to do the workshops, create the plans, offer expert advice on crime and violence. And so for us going towards the future, our engagement would have to be based on university funding and engagement with these communities further. But we appreciate your comments, and I do think that we should engage with them further in the future, even if not solicited by the government. As a criminology institute, we should take outreach as one of our missions. Thank you.
Thank you.